Thanks so much for coming, everyone. My name is Victoria Wingel, and I am the Forest and Climate Campaigner with Oregon Wild. I am so excited to welcome our speakers tonight. We have a really awesome presentation lined up for you all on Canopy of Titans, their brand new book. So we have the authors here tonight, Jessica Applegate and Paul Koberstein, who are going to share more about this book and some of the lessons that they learned about the forests in our region along the way. Special thanks to both of them who have generously offered so much of their time for this presentation, but also offered to raffle off a copy of their book tonight. We also have some new Oregon Wild swag to give away, and the winners are going to be contacted via email tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. Before we begin, I have just a little bit of housekeeping to go over. So you might notice that the chat function is off, but the Q&A function is on. So please feel free to use that and ask your questions at any point of the presentation, and then we'll answer those at the end. After Paul and Jessica's presentation, I'm going to come on and share a little bit about how this connects to our work at Oregon Wild and what you can do to help advance forest protections in the Pacific Northwest. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jessica and Paul.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you so much for showing up on a wild Wednesday evening, and it's definitely been a wild week. So we're really looking forward to this reprieve and sharing our new book with you, newish. It was published last year, August of 2024. And we have been working on this for 7 years. And it really started out as a single article and a single trip to Alaska. But as things often do, we just accumulated so much information, and we're so inspired by what we saw and the people that we met along the way, that we really wanted to dig in deep, and the culmination of that has come out in the book. One thing that we noticed when we first were writing about the forest is that people weren't really talking in the public domain about the relationship between the forest and the climate and its climate mitigation potential. Many scientists, of course, had been working on it, but we hadn't seen articles about it. And we just thought, wow, this is such an incredible connection that lay people need to understand in order to protect this beautiful place. So slide. So this is Paul and I, and we're taking a selfie on a bush flight over Prince of Wales Island. It was, I mean, as depressing of a topic as it is to report on these things, we did have a wonderful time, and we were fortunate enough to get this tour. And we're hoping with our presentation today to kind of present a big picture of the forest and what we write about in our book. And in our book are a lot of really specific, detailed pieces of science, and also some really great stories about the people and the animals and the creatures that live in the forest. So we're wanting to give you a big picture perspective, and talk about the people that we met along the way. Slide. Yeah, so this first we have to do a land acknowledgement, and it's really important to know and acknowledge that the Pacific Coast rainforest is the ancient homeland of many indigenous nations, and still is, and many of these nations are listed here on the slide. And we actually dedicated 4 chapters, a whole section of our book, to this indigenous perspective, and the section is called "This is Their Forest." One of the chapters was written by Terry Hansen, an acclaimed Native American journalist who sadly passed away about a week before the book was published in August. So that was really tragic. We were so happy, though, that we could get her work memorialized in our book. And then this is a leader that we interviewed and was very inspiring. His name was Clinton Case, and he was from the Craig Tribal Association in Craig, Alaska. And one of the great things about doing on-the-ground reporting and working in the field and ground truthing is you get to meet people like this. and you get to hear stories that otherwise maybe wouldn't be told. And one of his stories was very moving, where he said the people in his area that inhabit the land depend on the forest and the deer to live and to eat. That's what they eat. And after all the clear cuts happened, there aren't enough deer left for people to survive on. And it was a really touching story. And he talked about how the forest, they were clear cut, and yes, they grow back, but when they grow back as a monoculture, and they're all the same age, and it creates this thing called a dog hair forest. So it's a forest with really no understory, and it's just these bristly small branches, and it's really dense, and sunlight doesn't get through, and that's why plants can't grow, and so animals have nothing to graze on and to sustain themselves. So we just thought that was such an interesting perspective. Slide. We also interviewed dozens of scientists, and Paul especially is an incredible researcher, and he really dug deep into the work of these two very important people. First is Beverly Law of Oregon State University, and she did some of the most important and work first in this area. And then we have Dr. William Mumma of Tufts University in Boston, and he's a Nobel laureate and a lead author of 5 major science reports published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. And Dr. Mumma coined the word proforestation. And the concept of proforestation really struck Paul and I as a solution. And as we did our work with Cascadia Times, we really wanted to be solution oriented. So not just talk about the problems and the heartbreak that we're seeing, but what are the solutions? So when we stumbled on Dr. Mumma's work and Bev Law's work and dug deep, we were very, very excited to share their work and hopefully amplify their voices in a way that everyone can understand and get behind. So in this hour, we were fortunate enough to interview both of them, so we will hear directly from them. Slide. And we could not have written our book without our dear friends in the field. We'd especially like to first thank Catherine Mader. She's a consultant from Corvallis, and she served as a panelist at the Historic Forest Summit in 1993, chaired by President Clinton. So she has been doing this work for a very long time. And she introduced us to Dr. Dominic de la Sala, and he wrote probably the first book about the temperate rainforest, called The Temperate and Boreal Forests, Rainforests of the World, and he wrote that in 2012. And in this photo, we were out in the field and at the Viking lumber mill in Claywalk, Alaska, on Prince of Wales Island. And Dominic and Catherine were our guides on this trip, and we just had a wonderful time with them, and we were so grateful to them for sharing what they knew with us. Slide. So when we went on that first trip with Dominic and Catherine, and we've taken subsequent trips, we didn't plan on writing about the forest as a carbon sink necessarily. We were just really interested in, at that time, the roadless rule that Trump was trying to take away, that would have opened up a lot of area for more clear cuts, especially mature and old growth. And so we wrote about that. We also wrote about a carbon offset scheme that was happening with the state of California to drill in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. We wrote about one of the most fascinating things to us was that this huge rainforest, and we'll talk about where it is and what it is in a minute, but this huge forest that extends from Southeast Alaska all the way to north of the Russian River in California really had no definitive name. And that bothered us. You know, we think of the Amazon and we think of saving the Amazon, and we were thinking, why doesn't this place have a name or a name that stuck? I think there have been several organizations that have tried to name it, but nothing has really stuck as far as we know. Anyway, so we wrote these articles and we just realized we needed to write a book. We had so much information. Slide.
So, hello everybody, I'm Paul. We're going to show a video here in a moment, an interview with Dr. Muma, who was extremely generous with his time with us. He talked to me for several interviews. In this video, he explains why he thinks forests are vital organs of a living planet.
So all of the civilizations we know it occurred in mostly the last probably 7,000 years, but let's say 10,000 years to be generous. Much of that was due to the fact that forests were so extensive, they played a major role in stabilizing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and prevented it from rising too much, as did the oceans. Without that, it never would have happened. So to put it in a maybe more metaphorical way, forests and other ecosystems are essential organs of a living planet. And if we start we say, well, we have to protect half of them. I mean, any living organism I have, if you only protected half of their organs, they wouldn't survive very long. You know, I can do without one ear, I can do without one eye, I can do without one lung, one kidney, but I have to do with just one of all of those things. And it's unlikely that I, as a human being, am going to thrive under those circumstances. How the hell do we think the planet is going to thrive if only half of it is functioning with a way that has made it livable for us? I mean, it boggles my mind that we have been so callous and short-sighted in the way that we look at the natural world.
Slide.
All of the civilizations we know.
So the failure to protect forests is linked to problems all around the globe. You have the loss of biodiversity, climate change, leading to all kinds of disasters like the nasty hurricane in the Carolinas last fall, the deadly wildfires in LA. And of course, these disasters are triggered by increasing levels of carbon dioxide in the air and rising temperatures. As this chart shows, temperatures have been rising steadily for the last 6 decades, setting new records almost every year. And now we've passed the 1.5 degrees Celsius line, temperature rise above pre-industrial levels. This is dangerous territory. We've got to stop the rise in temperatures. And the only way to do that is we've got to stop burning fossil fuels. But we also need to get back to a more livable climate. We need to remove some of that CO2 from the air. Best way to do that is to protect forests. Slide. So Canopy of Titans examined forests as a climate solution through the lens of this incredible rainforest, the Pacific Coast temperate rainforest, more than 105,000 square miles, larger than Colorado, from the Russian River in California, all the way to the Kodiak Island in Alaska. Most people know it as a series of very spectacular landscapes, the Tongass, the Great Bear, the Olympic National Park, all the way down to the Redwoods. But scientists say it's actually a single unified ecosystem with a lot of carbon sequestration going on, a shared biodiversity, giant conifers, including 3 that rise over 300 feet, Sitka spruce in the north, Douglas fir in the middle, and redwoods in the south, mixed in with a lot of other species, hemlocks, cedars, firs, and you have salmon everywhere. Slide.
So this is a picture of our book, and I'm going to read from chapter 1. And our book starts out where we're looking for the forest names. And as I said before, we were surprised that this forest that Paul just explained didn't have an official name. So we began. 50 miles north of San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge, you enter the world's largest temperate rainforest. An inspiring cathedral of ancient redwood, Douglas fir, and Sitka spruce, the tallest trees on Earth. If you travel the full length of the rainforest, you will end up 2,500 miles away on the far western side of the Gulf of Alaska. Don't look for any signs marking an entrance to the rainforest. There aren't any. What's more, the rainforest has no official name, according to the National Geographic Names Information System database. So, what should we call it? We asked James Meacham, a professor of geology at the University of Oregon and an author of the Atlas of Oregon. Great question, he told us, and I don't have a definitive answer for you. Slide. So in this video, I'm going to read a little bit more from chapter 2, Too Good to Be True is the name of the chapter, but this is a video by Alex Harris, whose documentary Crown Jewels drew global attention to this forest. So we can play it. If there's one thing the planet has in abundance, it's trees. A study in 2015 by Yale University ecologist Thomas Crowther counted 3 trillion trees on Earth, 422 for each person. Without trees, life would be difficult, if not impossible. Trees are a source of food, medicine, fuel, shelter, and recreation for billions of people. In the Pacific coastal temperate rainforest, trees freshen the air with signature scents of fir, pine, spruce, and cedar. They stabilize soils, retain moisture, and filter pollution from the air and water. They cast a cooling shadow over streams that are home to millions of salmon. Salmon return the favor by bringing nutrients from the ocean in an ecological feedback loop. The tree's most important task, however, may be removing carbon from the atmosphere, but it's not something a single tree does alone. The clusters of trees we call forests perform this service on a massive scale, free of charge, without complaint. They are carbon capturing machines. Slide. Sometimes we call our rainforest the Amazon of the North. And as we know, the Amazon is the world's largest tropical rainforest. Our forest stores an immense amount of carbon, and some say that the Amazon is now a net emitter of carbon due to the fires and logging. As we live in the world's largest temperate rainforest, it also has the world's tallest trees. And we found out in the research that had been done that our forest in the Pacific Coast temperate region stores more carbon per acre than any other forest in the world. And that includes the Amazon. And then we have the next slide that shows this.
So this is the slide that provides the data that backs up what Jessica just said. More carbon per acre than any forest in the world. And so in the upper left-hand corner, you see our rainforest in the Northwest, well over 1,000 metric tons per hectare at the maximum, compared to on the East Coast of the United States, much less in Europe, South America, Australia, and Asia. Slide. So in this slide, we take a even closer look at the data. This is our list of forest climate hotspots around the world. At the top of this list, you'll see 5 sections of the redwood forest, each of them measuring more than 2,000 metric tons of carbon per hectare. A hectare is almost 2.5 acres. No other forest in the world stores more than 2,000 tons. The world leader is the Judd Smith State Park, the far northern corner of Northern California, with almost 2,600 tons per hectare, followed by 4 parks and forest reserves further south in the redwoods. After the redwoods, the leader is the eucalyptus forest in southern Australia, and then the sequoia groves in the Sierra Nevada. Finally, in this list, we have the Douglas fir region in Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. Now, by comparison, the Amazon, the densest part of the Amazon, has about 400 tons per hectare. You can see it's less than half of the number 10 forest on this list. Slide. This map shows where the Pacific rainforest stores its carbon. The yellow and blue-green areas have the most carbon. These are the older forests. The black areas have the least. And we want to give a shout out to Wayne Walker of the Wordwell Climate Research Institute in Boston, who prepared this map, especially for our book. Slide.
So we get to the question of what do we talk about when we talk about carbon? And one of the things that we often think of, and when we talk about climate change, is it's usually in the context of current and future carbon emissions. And we need to also realize that we have 300 gigatons of legacy carbon left over from the Industrial Revolution that still needs to be cleared on top of what we're already producing today. Slide. So different companies and countries have spent hundreds of millions, billions of dollars on trying to figure out the solution to this problem. And there's been carbon capture has been one idea, and it costs a lot to create the carbon capture technology, much less the carbon footprint of the carbon capture technology. There's been talk about clean coal. There's been talk about planting trees, but there is nothing else that can remove that legacy carbon like a working forest at the necessary scale, as quickly and as affordably. Slide. So some more fun facts about forests and carbon you can see on this slide. This is a picture that we took at the Port Angeles Lumber Mill in the shadow of the Olympic Mountains in Washington. And it just was always so striking to me how much logging is still going on. So the largest 1% of trees in an old growth forest provide half of the carbon storage. So that is a lot. And so when logging happens, that carbon is released through the branches, the crowns of the tree, the roots, the bark, even the soil. And as the understory is also destroyed in logging and clear cutting, that also releases carbon, as well as the logging operations themselves. There is also, again, more pollution that comes from the mill in the processing. So there's a lot more to the story of the carbon being released than just the logging of a single tree. Slide.
So you've seen how much carbon this forest is storing right now, but we want it to store even more. So the question is, how can we make that happen? The simple answer is, let the trees continue to grow. You might ask, well, what about planting trees? The ancient Chinese told us the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. They said the next best time to plant is today. But if you want to sequester carbon, the best time to plant a tree was 1,000 years ago. Best thing you can do today is protect a tree and a forest. Protecting forests is something you can do locally and have a global impact. Slide. So in this video, Professor Muma will explain to us what he means by the term proforestation, which he coined in a paper he wrote in 2019.
And here, see, if you think of it as follows, okay, for the foresters, there's sustainable forestry. For protecting the planet, there's proforestation management. Proforestation management means growing forests to achieve their potential for carbon accumulation and biodiversity. So it is a statement of a goal of the management practice. It's to accumulate the most carbon. By definition, that's going to be better than anything that the foresters are doing. Right? Because if you keep harvesting trees, they never get very big. So the harvest cycle can be, if it's typically 30 or 40 years, a 40-year-old tree is nothing compared to a 140-year-old tree in terms of volume. And here, see, if you think of it.
So here is Dr. Muma's proforestation paper, and we'll have a link to this and other papers we talk about at the end of our presentation. You can screenshot those or do whatever you like, but this is the paper, and it meant a lot to us when it came out, because it basically validated our main thesis that forests are a big part of the solution. It also cited our article in Cascadia Times on forest carbon in the Tongass, and we were surprised to see that. In fact, we didn't notice until like 6 months after we got the paper in their inbox. Slide.
So Dr. Muma wasn't the only scientist thinking about protecting forests as a climate solution. We would be amiss if we did not mention Beverly Law. In 2018, Dr. Beverly Law of Oregon State University published this landmark paper that showed that protecting old growth and mature forests and extending harvest rotations on tree farms can increase the carbon stored in forests by 50%. She is an author and co-author of over 200 peer-reviewed publications. Bill Muma cited her papers in his proforestation paper. And Professor Law revealed the timber industry is the biggest carbon polluter in Oregon. And based on her data, we know that the timber industry in Oregon emits more carbon than the world's dirtiest coal plant in Taiwan. And that is just something that is not talked about enough. Slide. So here in this next slide, we asked Professor Law to share her insights about proforestation.
Proforestation. So we were batting this around, as Bill said, is there a word we can use that's different from everything? And I said, well, you got to be careful, because when you coin a phrase, it's often twisted by others. And so, and forestation, when you think of forestation, it just means you're adding forest. But in this, we were trying to find is how do you protect what's there? And instead of just having it focused on what might be taken as an industrial word, forestation would be. And so when I presented that at Heinz in Washington, D.C., I said, what we're really talking about is not moving into other lands like shrublands and grasslands. We're talking about protecting what we have, and that's particularly the mature and older forests. So we've kind of it evolved that way, and then Bill just wanted to be able to have something to that he could go to by using it more frequently. And in a lot of my publications, I try not to say too much about it because sometimes people will hang up on it. And in another way, I would just explain why it was so important to protect mature and old forests. And I might have proforestation, one word there, and not elaborate.
Slide.
Proforestation. So
So needless to say, her research definitely distressed the timber industry locally. And in fact, they came out saying that they were insulted by her work, and they called her conclusions contrived, untethered from reality, unusable in policy discussions, all of these accusations, and basically personally attacked any scientist who disagreed with Oregon Forest Industries Council. So they are using the playbook that was borrowed from big tobacco and big oil, and they are blocking every attempt to deploy forest as a climate solution, and personally attacking scientists like Dr. Law. Bev is now retired, but she's still publishing new research, and she is still among the top 1% most frequently cited researchers in agricultural sciences. So she is a gem, and we are so grateful for her work. Slide.
So it's fair to say that the timber industry is not on board with proforestation. In fact, they are trying to kill it with misinformation, greenwashing, and gaslighting. And we've been keeping track of what they're saying. We've seen them manipulate facts and emotions to get people to believe things that are just not true. So, for example, we've seen many studies that say growing forests and forests can add carbon until a very old age, say 800 years. The industry says forests stop growing after 70 or 80 years. Those studies also show that it's better to store carbon in mature and old growth forests. But the industry says that the best place to store carbon is in wood products like lumber. We've also heard a lot about forest carbon offsets, which the industry totally loves. Oil companies are paying timber companies large sums of money to protect their forests and not cut them down. Then they go out and emit more pollution. In theory, the idea is that the newly sequestered carbon offsets equally the new pollution. But economists say these forest carbon offsets rarely work as planned. One study said 82% of them fail. They make the climate worse. But I would say that the misinformation campaign appears to be working. The industry was able to pass a law in Washington a few years ago declaring logging to be a climate solution. Slide. Here's another terrible idea the industry has glommed onto. Let's plant 1 trillion trees. The trillion tree idea came from an article published in 2019 in Science magazine. Scientists around the world trashed the magazine for publishing it. One German ecologist, Stefan Rahmstorff, said, "That sounds like a dream. Unfortunately, it's too good to be true." Science magazine immediately published a retraction. They got a lot of things wrong. For one thing, they vastly overestimated the amount of carbon that could be sequestered by the 1 trillion new trees. It's like 5-fold error. But the timber industry still says planting trees is a climate solution. Now, for the record, a tree planted today isn't going to help the climate for decades and decades. I don't think we have that much time. Slide. This photograph by Francis Etherington of Resburg shows one of the largest tree farms in the world. It's Weyerhaeuser's 210,000-acre Millet-Kama tree farm in Coos County, Oregon. Weyerhaeuser liquidated the entire forest in 30 years. Once the trees were gone, it shut down a mill that was processing the logs in Coos Bay. We bring this up because the industry often blames regulations protecting the endangered spotted owl and the marbled murrelet for mill closures. That's simply not the case. Slide. A forest doesn't store all of its carbon in the trees. There's also a lot of carbon on the ground and in the soil. We asked Dr. Mumma to explain this in the next video.
But what's important is how much carbon is in the tree and in the soils of the forest rather than in the atmosphere. And the older the forest is, the larger is the percentage of carbon that's stored in forest soils. That's, you know, for let's say at least by the time you're at mature forests, there is usually more per acre in the soil than there is in the trees. Because trees are constantly dropping their leaves and needles and small branches and things. And it's the natural process that's analogous to what we'd call composting, right? You know, you take organic matter and you put it somewhere and give it to bacteria and other soil creatures to chew on it. And they produce this carbon-rich soil, and that keeps increasing continuously as long as there are trees still growing and dropping their needles and leaves and things over time. As soon as you harvest, the bacteria are still eating up what's in the soils, but there's no new carbon material coming in to be converted into soil. And so even if you plant a new forest, it'll be 20 or 30 years before that growth is offsetting the emissions coming from the soils as they are being broken down. Okay, so all of that has to be taken into account when you talk about harvesting.
So the question remains, what is happening on the policy end? We see what the science says. What are the policy people saying? And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, what are they saying? In 2022, they cited Bill Mumma's paper on proforestation and began talking about that concept for the first time. They're now calling natural forest ecosystems green infrastructure, and protecting them is now their highest priority. Slide. The US government, at least when Biden was in office, developed a climate strategy that called for scaling up the removal of carbon from the air. Biden also signed an executive order protecting mature and old growth forests for carbon sequestration. Slide. But what's important is what happens now. We know what to expect from Trump. Bill McKibben told us in 2018 that the Trump administration knows the planet is going to boil. It just doesn't care. You tell me if those words aren't still valid. Trump's already taken us out of the Paris Climate Accord, and he's going to cut spending on clean energy. The next thing he's going to do is going to start logging our old growth, starting in the Tongass National Forest. Slide.
Yeah, so this is a map of the old growth logging in the Tongass National Forest, and you can see how extensive it is. And Paul just mentioned, you know, the different things that are going on there. One of them, and this is how we started our work, was the reversal of the roadless rule, and that would open up even more areas to logging, and many of those are old growth. And so we were successful Trump did reverse it, but Biden switched it back, but I'm sure it will be on the table again. And so this is one of the things that we can look out for, and, finding ways to give public comment on this and understanding what the roadless rule is, because we know that he will definitely try again. Slide. So this is a picture that we took from the air on Prince of Wales Island, and it's of the whole island looks like this. And so there's different aged forests and trees. You can just see that in the foreground. There's younger trees, older trees, and then just vast amounts of clear cuts and roads. And let's go to the next slide. On this trip, we were traveling with Catherine Mader and Dominic de la Sala, and Catherine Mader pointed out and said, look down. And I looked down and we saw this ship, and it happened to be right next to, I believe it was the Viking lumber mill. And so we got this great shot of what was going on. And later, we were able to zoom in on the name of the boat and find the name of the boat and track it in the marinetraffic.com maritime traffic tool, which was really interesting. And what it showed is that this boat, it was called the Global Striker, it was leaving port in Klawock, Alaska, traveling to China. And ironically, as we later found out, on that same day, the president of Viking Mill was in court complaining about how they just didn't have enough logs and that they needed more access to the forest. And it was just one of those ironic moments when you're out in the field and things just come together. And it kind of begs the question, if we don't have enough logs, why are we shipping raw logs to China? And then on top of that, not only is our timber gone, but then the jobs that maybe would have processed those logs are gone as well. So none of it really makes sense. And it's really helpful sometimes to get a clear view of actually what is happening, despite what people say. Slide.
So we saw hillsides like this all over Prince of Wales Island. This is the big thorn timber sale. The loggers leave about 70% of the old growth because they have defects in the wood or they're too big for processing at the local mill. These are beautiful old growth yellow cedar logs. What a waste. Slide. The Tongass is not the only old growth forest in our rainforest that is at risk for logging. Chapter 14, we write about a place called Fairy Creek on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. It's 3,000 acres of old growth in this tiny little valley. It's a beautiful valley. The last unlogged watershed on the southern part of that island. Lots of carbon, rich in biodiversity. Needless to say, it was not very popular with forest advocates. They set up blockades, try to stop the timber sale from going forward, stop the road building. Canadian Mounties came in with pepper spray, broke some bones, and arrested over 1,000 people. But the protesters did not give in. They forced the government to call for a delay in the timber harvest. And then it was supposed to resume February 1st, 3 days from now. We just got word that the logging operation has been completely canceled. So it looks like Fairy Creek has been saved, at least for now. Slide. Meanwhile, in Southwest Oregon, the Bureau of Land Management is logging old growth. Francis Etherington caught up with a logging crew near Remote in a place called Kenyan mountain. It was during the height of the pandemic. Trees over 200 years old are falling, and this is their operation. Slide. So who gets to say what happens in our forests? I think it's clear that everybody gets to say something. In the 1990s, public pressure from forest advocates like you have got to take credit for stopping logging of most of the old growth. But now the timber industry wants to turn back the clock and begin this massive logging campaign operation. Andy Kerr, who used to be conservation director and director of Oregon Wild, told us in an interview that if the big timber industry feels besieged now, they'll rue the day they tried to reclaim the battle days and not adapt to changing times. Slide.
So this ends our presentation about the book. And one of the things that we really believe in is what can we do about all of this? And one of the things that's topmost on our list right now is the Northwest Forest Plan and the comments that are due on March 17th. So we will, Victoria will tell you more about how to get involved with that. And they have a wonderful spot on their website. It provides talking points and a direct link to provide those comments. So I think it's really important that we stay optimistic and do what we can and stay informed. And, you know, part of understanding why we do what we do is understanding the history and the people that have lived in this forest. And we hope that our book can kind of bring some of those stories to life and inspire people to take action. And so on this next slide, if you want to do any more research, there's a lot available. These are some of our books and papers that we are recommending. Of course, we have, how many footnotes do we have? Like hundreds and hundreds of footnotes in our book.
More than 300.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information. We cite everything. So we encourage you to do your own research as well. And on this next slide, this is a copy of our book if you would like to purchase it. And also check out our website at times.org, or it's great. It has all of the old articles that we mentioned up there and a way to purchase our book. Or here is the OR book link where you can purchase it direct from our publisher in New York. So with that, we want to thank Oregon Wild and Victoria and all of you caring enough to come out on this Wednesday night and listen to this presentation. And we wish you well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you both so much. That was amazing. So much good information in here. And it's very clear that these forests are super special in our region and they're very much worth protecting. On that note, I'm going to pull up my presentation to share a little bit more about the Northwest Forest Plan and what we can do. One second. Okay. So unfortunately, not many true old growth forests or even mature forests exist in the United States today. Back in the 90s, before any real safeguards were put in place, aggressive logging claimed about 90% of the old growth trees that were previously found in the US. And today, most of the remaining mature and old growth forests can be found on our federal public lands. So that's largely lands managed by the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. But a lot of that can be attributed to the Northwest Forest Plan. For the last 30 years, the Northwest Forest Plan has been relatively successful in preserving our remaining oldest forests. So this was a compromise enacted in 1994 to try and end the timber wars that we spoke about. and it covered 24 million acres within the range of the northern spotted owl. So this little guy is super important for forest protection. It's on the endangered species list, and really, like many other creatures and critters, this species relies on the unique characteristics that an old growth forest can provide. They can't find them anywhere else. And so it's super important that we protect this habitat so that this species and others like it are able to thrive. As if we didn't have enough reasons to keep these forests standing, right? So this Northwest Forest Plan amended the forest plans of 17 national forests in Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. So largely the whole region that Canopy of Titans touches on. Now, this plan was not perfect. It left 1 million acres of mature and old growth still open for logging. So Oregon Wild and our allies are constantly playing whack-a-mole with the agencies, fighting some of the most egregious sales that are put forth. The original plan also excluded Indigenous voices, which is a massive gap that has long needed addressing. So the plan is currently under revision, but unfortunately, all of the proposals put forth by the agency could weaken safeguards that would keep our oldest forests off the chopping block, and this threatens decades of progress that was hard fought. So you can learn a lot more about the Northwest Forest Plan at this link here. After the presentation, I am going to share out all of these resources, so no need to scramble to write this down or anything. But this website has a ton of information to learn more about the amendment process, and more importantly, what you can do to advocate for our oldest forests. On this site, you can find a brief history of the plan. We also did another webcast recently that walks through the different proposals, and it also has some blog posts and other links where you can take action. So the good news, there are so many opportunities right now where you can get involved. And I'm going to share some of those things with you, so you can help us raise the pressure in the coming months, because we really need it now more than ever. So the first thing is submitting public comments. The draft environmental impact statement is now out and available for the public, and the agency is accepting official public comment on that. So the deadline to submit comments is March 17th. Submitting a public comment is a fantastic way to go on the record and demonstrate that there's widespread public support for protecting our forests. It's a really important step, so let's flex our democratic muscles and show the agency what matters most to the people of Oregon. There's 2 ways you can do this. You can sign the petition on our website. It's a super simple action you can take. It only takes about a minute to do, and we'll take care of submitting it to the agency by the deadline. You can also submit a personalized comment. This tends to have a much bigger impact on the agency, and it's weighted a lot differently than petitions are. So we put together a helpful guide with resources and talking points to help you draft your own comment, as well as instructions for how to submit. And as a thank you for taking the time to craft your very own comment, we're holding another raffle for everyone who submits. So there's more information on our website, but all you have to do is send me a copy of your confirmation number, and I will add you to the list. And then the winners of that raffle are going to be announced via email at the close of our comment period. Not sure if you've noticed, but we went over a whole rebrand last year, and we're super excited about it and want everyone wearing Oregon Wild swag. So raffles all day. So definitely submit your public comments. So next, you can also write a letter to Congress. So we're asking our members to tell Congress to oppose weakening the Northwest Forest Plan and demand real protections for wildlife, climate, and old growth forests. We're going to need multiple points of pressure on our side, so we need to demonstrate to Congress that this is an issue Oregonians care deeply about. So this link here will allow you to send a letter to Senators Wyden and Merkley and Representative Blumenauer. And if you'd like to take this a step further, you can even give them a call too. And lastly, you can attend an event. The Forest Service is hosting a series of in-person info sessions at many of the national forests that will be impacted by the new plan. So there's a few more still coming up in Corvallis, Springfield, Stevenson, and Sisters. We put together a guide with resources, talking points, and questions that you can raise to help hold the agency accountable. And we'll also have Oregon Wild staffers at each of these events. So we'll be around if you want to come and ask us questions. If you want some extra support at these meetings, we will be there. The meeting in Springfield on February 12th our partners are holding a rally outside of that as well. So that should be super fun. I'm going to be there. We're going to have a ton of signs. Make sure to bring yours too. Yeah, hopefully we will see you there. So yeah, this is a really important process. But one thing to keep in mind is that we are setting the stage to make forest protections a must-do issue that has to be addressed. And to do that, we need all of you. So if you're interested in getting involved, be on the lookout for all of the resources that are headed your way. I'll get that email out to you all tomorrow. We have until March 17th to engage in this formal process, but our work doesn't stop there. So stay tuned. There will be so much more to come in the coming months and years ahead. But yeah, thank you all so much for joining. I also wanted to let you know that if you're here with an organization, Paul and Jessica have offered to host a webcast for you as well. So feel free to reach out. But in the meantime, we have quite a number of questions in the chat. So I am going to pull those up and we can start answering those. Okay, so one question. Could you discuss replanting logged over land? Where does that stand?
I mean, after a harvest, the law requires the timber company to replant the land within, I think, 2 years. At least that's the law in Oregon. And I know also in Alaska, there is no requirement to replant because those logged forests typically regrow by themselves. I'm not sure I answered the question, but.
Well, and that's a really good point. When we were in Alaska, that was one of the questions we asked Catherine Mader, because everywhere we went, I thought, wow, there's so much clear cut. How do they manage replanting and then all of the different chemical treatments needed to pesticides and whatnot, herbicides? And they just replenish on their own in Alaska in some of the forests that we saw. Now, I don't know. I think Paul spoke to the policy in Oregon.
Awesome. Thank you both. Okay, so we have another question. I can answer this one. Do you have to live in a state to publicly comment on protecting our forests? So you do not have to live in Oregon, California, or Washington to comment in this process. These are federal lands, so federal forest policy. They're public lands, they belong to all of us, and we're all impacted by climate change as well. So definitely feel free to comment if you don't live in any of these states. They're still your public lands, and your voice still matters in this process too. So we have another question from Richie Scott. Are there other endangered species in our rainforest? If so, why was the owl chosen to be the symbol of the fight?
There are several species of salmon that are listed, and I think there are some other critters like the fisher. There's a flying squirrel, the Humboldt flying squirrel. And I'm not sure the status of these species, but I know there is a petition to list these if they're not already.
Awesome. Let's see. So there's another question in the chat. Do the U.S. Forest Service meetings work through the preferred options, or is it really high level? So I have not been to these meetings yet. I've heard that it's a mix of both. Generally, they're pretty high level, but they will walk through the different alternatives. I have heard from some of our volunteers that have attended some of the meetings so far that when they ask some of the harder, more specific questions, like, for example, how much more board feet do you expect this to the new plans to increase over time? They can't really answer questions like that. So I think it really depends. All of these meetings are being independently organized by the individual Forest Service offices. So definitely worth attending and checking it out. But if you want a more in-depth understanding of what's going on, and you're not feeling like you're getting that from them, feel free to reach out. We have lots of information and resources that we can share as well. Let's see. We have another question in here from Marion. Can you comment on the increased fire protection properties of old growth forests?
You know, our book did not get into wildfire at all, or to any depth. That's a completely whole nother topic that requires enormous research and time to put together. But I can tell you that we did get a grant from something called the Fund for Investigative Journalism to do this work on fire. And what we found was that, you know, the Forest Service wants to thin forests, and then they say that's going to reduce the wildfire risk to homes and public safety. And that's not true. There's no logging in a faraway forest that's going to protect your home from a fire that's driven by these incredible winds that we see in so many of these big destructive fires. You'll recall in 2020, I think it was September of 2020, we had a series of wildfires all the way across the state, and these fires were all driven by wind, heavy winds in our wet old growth forests. The wet forests, the old growth forests, do not burn as rapidly as other forests, simply because there's more water in the old growth forest, and the canopy usually keeps it moist. So I guess the answer to your question is old growth forests are better capable of withstanding wildfire than a younger forest or a tree farm.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I would just add something to that. The article that Paul mentioned, it's called the Logjam in Biden's $50 billion wildfire plan. And that was published in Undark magazine through MIT. And we really covered the fact that a lot of the wildfire issues, as Paul said, does have to do with wind, and with wind is the embers, and that the main solution for protecting ourselves from wildfire as people is to use home hardening strategies. And unfortunately, that is not being funded, but what is being funded is quote unquote thinning to reduce what's called fuel in old growth forests. And actually, this is just completely backwards. So that article is also listed on our website on Cascadia Times if you want to see it and read further.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm curious if there's a question in the chat about timber unity. Did your book touch on that at all? I'm not sure if you explored that group.
That's interesting. I went to a timber unity rally just to check them out. In 2020, they had a bunch of log trucks jamming the area around the state capitol in Salem, and definitely off the wall. They don't believe in protecting forests for the climate. They don't even believe climate change is a real thing. So there's really nothing you can say to these people. They don't recognize facts, in my opinion. Maybe that's too harsh, but they don't.
I would largely agree. Thanks, Paul. There's another question in here asking about the barred owl and spotted owl controversy. So for folks who don't know, there is a project aiming to kill, I think, 500,000 barred owls because they are outcompeting the endangered spotted owl. They're invasive, and it's been pretty detrimental to the spotted owl population. In my mind, I think we really need to be doing more to protect the habitat that spotted owls rely on. It's kind of insane to me to kill one species to save another, especially when we're not protecting their habitat as seriously as we need to. So it's kind of a crazy proposal in my mind, and I love owls, so I'm personally not a very big fan of that. It's not a project that we've taken on within our organization, but we definitely all about protecting spotted owl habitat, not killing species to save them.
You know, I'm amazed at the lengths the timber industry will go to avoid protecting habitat. And killing barred owls is just one of these solutions, quote unquote, that has come out. It seems to me that if barred owls are a problem, there's got to be a less lethal way of solving it. And I'm not an expert. I don't know what that is, but in my opinion.
I would agree. I was on a hiking trip and I stopped by a ranger station once, and they had some taxidermied owls in the office, and one of the agency staff told me that they think spotted owls are just bad at being owls, and maybe barred owls are just better owls, which was ridiculous. So I thought that really spoke to the culture of the agency, and how much work we really need to do to wind that back. Because yeah, Paul, like you said, it is amazing the lengths that they will go to avoid protecting these places and not logging them.
Wow.
Let's see, there's a lot of comments in here. Let me see what other questions we have. Have either of you thought about starting a podcast to get to younger citizens?
Oh, wow.
No. I've been on a
No.
few podcasts with other people and that's great, but I don't really want to do my own. I'm too busy writing.
And we explored it a couple, like 3 or 4 years ago, and we just both, I work another full-time job, and both of us are just so into the research. But, you know, that is a good idea now that the book is out and we've kind of had time to digest it and get it out in the world. We'll see what happens. But we've had a lot of interest from younger people, which has been really, really exciting. And I do think that more of a, you know, using those avenues like social media and different things can really help that. And Oregon Wild, you guys are doing a great job at that. I've seen a big difference in the last few years. So awesome.
I would add that if there's someone in the audience that has a podcast that is interested in talking to us, you know, give us a ring.
Awesome. Thank you both. Let's see, there's another question in here. I know you already mentioned that you didn't go too far into wildfire, so feel free to skip. But how much carbon is stored in a burn forest? Is there anything you want to say on that issue?
Oh, absolutely. I was just looking at some research, and I think Dominic Della Sala was the author of some of this, that showed that the amount of carbon released by a forest fire has been grossly overestimated by a number of scientists, including the Forest Service itself. When you look at a forest that's been burned, you'll see a lot of snags, a lot of downed logs, a lot of charred wood. There's a lot of carbon in that wood, and it's going to decompose, but it'll take a long time for it to do so. And while it decomposes, it's going to still store a lot of carbon. A Douglas fir, an old growth Douglas fir tree, will take 1,000 years or so to fully decompose. So a forest fire is not the end of a forest service to the climate.
And
Just
and as we know, it's often very healthy. And forest fire is a natural is a natural event in a healthy forest. And so there's a lot of regeneration that happens. And I think in the slideshow, we showed a picture of a charred out redwood, and they're all over if you explore the redwoods in California. I mean, they're built to survive that. So, and that's why having a forest that's diverse with many different ages and different species can help mitigate just the full-on flattening of a forest by fire.
You know, if I could add one thing too, there's a lot of research that shows many of these species need fire. I mean, habitat, fire, burned habitat, burned forest habitat. I know that the spotted owl is one of them. The black-breasted woodpecker is another. The fisher is another. So just because there's a forest burned in an area does not mean it's, you know, a desert biodiversity. There's a lot of biodiversity in there.
Awesome. Thanks so much. There's a comment in the chat about from Patricia. She said she read your book and loved it, and was really struck about the use of Agent Orange as an herbicide in Oregon forests. Did either of you want to expand on that at all?
Oh boy, that
I
chapter
know,
is
right? So
called
much to say.
From Agent Orange to Atrazine. I guess that you know, read the book, but you know, they used Agent Orange in these forests around the town of Alsea and other places in the Coast Range during the 1970s. There was experiments being run by a professor at Oregon State University. They no longer use Agent Orange or the active ingredient in there. Today they're using something called atrazine, which is a gender bender chemical banned in Europe, but allowed in Oregon forests. Now go figure.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. So I think the rest of what's in the Q&A here are just comments. So I think we're out of questions. Oh, one more just came in. Where is that still being used? Do either of you know?
You mean atrazine?
I think so.
I think atrazine is regularly used pretty much everywhere in every forest. I've not seen anybody back down on their atrazine use. I know that local advocates, like in the Coast Range, Seal Rock area, Waldport, other areas in that area, have been fighting logging plans to spray, and it's a huge controversy. And one of the problems is that current Oregon law allows the spraying of these chemicals within 300 feet of a house or a school or a bus shelter. And that's not protecting anybody.
And I know if people want to know more about that, I know Lisa Arkin with Beyond Toxics has done a lot of work in that area. So I would check out their website also. It's Beyond Toxics.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. I think we have reached the end of our questions. Did either of you want to say anything more before we wrap it up?
I'm good.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you both so much. This was awesome.
And thank
For
you
folks who
everybody
are
for
still
coming.
on. Yeah, so great that you all made it. Happy Wednesday. I'm going to send out an email tomorrow with a list of all of the resources that we talked about today, including what Paul and Jessica shared, all of their sources as well. So
Okay.
yeah, be on the lookout, and thanks again for joining.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye all.
Bye.